Story 1. I was in a gas station bathroom in downtown Memphis while my male friend was pumping gas. The bathroom was at the back of the gas station, so it was not visible from my car. I was using the toilet when I heard two men speak to each other very quietly on the other side of the locked bathroom door. Now, this was before mobile phones were common, so I could not text my friend and let him know what was going on. I decided to do my best to make a break for it, so instead of flushing the toilet when I was done, I very quietly went and unlocked the bathroom door, flung it open, and walked straight out at a quick speed before cutting a sharp right to get back to the gas pumps. Sure enough, there was a man standing on either side of the doorway waiting for me. One of them said something like, "Hey, come here," and I said, "No thanks," and kept walking. It was terrifying, honestly. I am so glad I had great hearing and listened to my gut instinct. Story 2. Texas ice storm in 2021. I was driving my Mazda 3 down a road when, out of nowhere, the car started rotating but was still moving in the direction I was going. Somehow, I drifted it through an intersection and into a gas station completely unharmed. Story 3. I was taking a small sailboat literally 10 nautical miles up the coast when I was about 16 and encountered a bit of weather. I was experienced but not extremely experienced. I slipped and while getting up, got hit in the back of the head with the boom hard enough to be knocked out. I didn't get the sail down, obviously, and capsized. I woke up in the water, maybe 20 feet from the boat. Fortunately, there was no hold or cabin, so the boat stayed afloat, and I was able to cling to it and ultimately right it. However, there is nothing like being unconscious in the water and waking up to see your boat drifting away in a squall. I guess a close second would be breaking my collarbone on a small island I had kayaked to and realizing I was incapable of kayaking back. Story 4. Waking up and not being able to walk. I had a spinal cord tumor that eventually reached the point of taking away that ability in others. Luckily, the removal of it got me back to about 99% regular. I still have numbness in my upper back where I can't feel a good back scratch. I'll take it. Story 5. Caught my own shadow moving in the corner of my eye and yelled, "Who is there?" Spoiler. It was me, and I am still embarrassed. Story 6. My granddad made me watch Scream when I was 7, then proceeded to wear his new Scream mask, standing outside and peeking at me through the kitchen window. I don't think I will ever move that fast again. Story 7. I wasn't alone. I was at a friend's house for their birthday party. Their parents ran to the store late at night and left us kids by ourselves. We were watching the Garfield movie when we heard something tap on the window. We turned around and saw a man staring in at us, who then proceeded to try to get in through the front door. It was locked, so he spent about 10 minutes circling the house trying to find a way in while we panicked and hid. Eventually, my friend's parents came back, and the man was gone. I never visited that friend's house again. Story 8. I was bench pressing alone in my basement when I got a little too confident and couldn't get the bar off my chest. I struggled quite a bit before I slid the plates off. I never did that again. Story 9. I have high blood pressure and was trying some new blood pressure medication. I took it and I was at home alone when, after about half an hour, I began to feel very sleepy and like I was about to pass out. I didn't know what was happening but had no energy to even get up. I didn't know if I was having a heart attack or something else very serious. My phone was on my nightstand and I could not muster the energy to even get to it. So I lay there, panicking, trying to figure out what to do. I ended up passing out and woke up on the floor with my wife shaking me, asking if I was okay and calling emergency services. It turns out the dosage of the new blood pressure medication was too high and my blood pressure actually got too low, which can also be dangerous. Story 10. Working as a young adult on a geriatric unit, I was doing a night shift and we had to perform solo hourly rounds to ensure everyone was breathing. At the time, the unit had installed privacy curtains around each bed, for beds to a room. I went to one dorm to check on a patient as I was walking around with my flashlight at about 3 in the morning. All of a sudden, I pulled one of the curtains to check on the patient, and there she was, standing right in front of me with these steely metallic blue eyes. Startled me. "Hello, dearie." I almost lost my composure. Story 11. I was hiking by myself on this network of trails and everything was fine. Then something changed and suddenly I was terrified. I turned around and started walking back to the trailhead. Something told me not to run, but I wanted to badly. I reached the tree line and made it out to the open field. I hurried to my car. For weeks later, a woman was killed by a mountain lion on that trail. Story 12. I had a severe case of acid reflux in the middle of the night and choked on my own vomit. I thought I was going to die. My roommates were sleeping, and I debated waking them and trying to explain what was happening, but I didn't think I had time. So, I just took my chances to see if I would survive or not. I did. Story 13. I was home alone one time when I was about 13, and the male landlord and maintenance workers walked in completely unexpectedly without knocking. It was a very frightening experience for a young girl alone. Story 14. In my teens, home alone at night, I thought I heard a noise outside, so I carefully peeled back the blinds to take a look. There was a face staring directly at me. I jumped and screamed. Turned out it was my own reflection. It doesn't end there. With my heart racing, I decided to go to bed. I went around the house turning everything off. Suddenly, there was a noise right behind me. A horrible, wet, animalistic noise, like somebody screaming with a sore throat. Exactly the kind of sound a sound effects director would create for a zombie movie. I jumped and screamed again. It turned out it was my parents' water feature they left running. The pump just makes that sound 2 minutes after you turn it off. I never knew, and the wait was long enough that I didn't associate the sound with the action until I gathered enough courage to investigate and figured it out. I didn't sleep well that night. Story 15. Once, I was watching Arachnophobia as a 13-year-old on Halloween. I went to bed, got a little nervous because of the movie, and decided to shake out my bedspread. I found a solid 3-inch wolf spider sitting like an Andes mint on my pillow. I slept in the bathtub that night. I don't know why that felt safe, but it did. Story 16. The smoke alarm went off in the middle of the night. Alone with the kids, my heart racing, I jumped out of bed and ran out of my room. There was no smoke. I ran to the basement, but still no smoke. The alarm was screaming so loud, and I couldn't find the fire. Then suddenly the alarm stopped. In the end, one of the hardwired alarms was malfunctioning. But I'll never forget that initial feeling that the house was on fire. Not a single child so much as got out of bed. I'm convinced that smoke alarms are useless for children. Story 17. When I was around 14, I was in the basement playing video games around midnight. My parents had been asleep for hours. Right above me was the kitchen, which had a large pot rack mounted to the ceiling. Suddenly, the pot rack fell and made a tremendous noise. I was so convinced that we were being burglarized that I ran into the kitchen, grabbed the chef's knife, and ran to wake up my parents, without ever noticing the 8 or so pots and pans scattered everywhere. Story 18. I was 14 when this happened, and I wasn't alone, but my brother was sleeping upstairs. I was downstairs watching television around 7 p.m. when the light on the stairs suddenly shut off. I got scared but tried to think positively, so I kept telling myself this bulb must have exploded or something, but I was still a bit scared. As I went up the stairs slowly in the dark, I looked for the light switch, and surprise, surprise, the light was turned off, so I turned it back on while my heart just dropped. I knocked on my brother's door, and he answered with messy hair and red eyes while squinting and blocking the stair light with his hand because he was sleeping in the dark. That's when I knew it wasn't him because he was still sleeping. To this day, I don't know what happened. Story 19. Personally, I had sleep paralysis. I always wanted to experience it, but it was a horrible experience. I was convinced I was being strangled by an evil shadow, but none of it was real. Felt so real. Story 20. Driving on one of those bridges built in the 1930s that have super narrow lanes. It had 2 lanes in the same direction, kind of like a proto-interstate, and it was winter. I was in the right lane, and a tractor trailer was next to me in the left. As soon as I got on the bridge, I could feel no traction because of ice. Fortunately, I froze and didn't move the steering wheel or hit the brakes, and eventually, I was off the bridge and could feel traction. I suspect if I had done something, I would have gone into either the bridge railing or the truck and not had a good day. Story 21. I pulled off the highway into a picnic area late at night, feeling kind of sick. I had a severe seizure and woke up sitting on the ground next to my car the next morning, wearing different pants. I am not 100% sure that I didn't actually die for a minute. Story 22. I was taking a walk one day when something bumped against my thigh. I looked down to see a huge Rottweiler. While I was debating whether to run, scream, or drop dead, something cold touched my opposite hand. Yes, another Rottweiler. They walked on either side of me in perfect heel for about 2 blocks before trotting up a side street. I never saw them again. Story 23. Sleep paralysis. I am a survivor of child trafficking, and while I was experiencing the worst episode of sleep paralysis ever, everything that was done to me as a child replayed in my mind. Faceless figures, as I rarely saw their faces due to being sedated, were doing unspeakable things. I went on Seroquel after that. Story 24. Anytime I am driving my car and smell something out of the ordinary, I get a cold flash and sweaty palms until it smells normal again. When my first car broke down, it was immediately preceded by the weirdest thing I have ever smelled. I do not know what it was. I have had a hard time describing it, but the association of an odd smell with a dead car is stuck in my brain. Odd smells make me anticipate the imminent death of my beloved Subaru. Story 25. I used to live in an apartment with a long hallway. My friends were always creeped out by that hallway whenever they came over. One of them claims to have seen something. Anyway, I was leaving for work one day, and as I was locking the door, I heard something from inside the apartment running down the hallway coming towards me. I was reluctant to go home that day. The lady who rented the apartment to me was into Santeria. If you are Afro-Caribbean or Latino, then you know what this is. Anyway, I am convinced there was some bad energy in there. Story 26. I woke up with 3 men wearing masks and armed with weapons in my room at 3 a.m. The first thing I saw was a hand reaching for my wallet beside me on my bed. My first reaction was to jump up and run after the man who was heading for the door, but it was dark, and I was hit several times with what I thought were punches, but it turned out to be guns and other metal objects. I managed to bring one man to the ground and wrestled with him for a minute, but then I got hit from behind in the ribs, which took my legs out from under me and knocked the breath out of me. I remember the warm blood flowing into my mouth, and as I walked to the mirror, I realized I could see my skull through a gash in my forehead. I drove to the hospital and received treatment for 5 lacerations, a broken orbital bone, and broken teeth. The next morning, I found a handle from what must have been a pellet gun pistol, which must have broken when I was struck. I never got my wallet back, and I found out it was a disgruntled, jealous ex who sent some men to my house to steal my valuables. Story 27. At 9 years old, I fell into a waterfall basin with sheer, 25-foot-high stone walls on each side, trapping me between the waterfall on one side and stony, bone-breaking rapids on the other. The spring melt-off waters were very cold. After shouting for help, I realized nobody could hear me, and I was on my own. At that point, my brain turned off all my emotions, and I climbed out using the gaps in the moss-covered, slippery stone walls. Not like I had any other choices. Story 28. When I was a kid, one of my chores was taking the garbage out to an incinerator by the garage. This usually happened after dinner, so it was often dark out when I would take the trash outside. For some reason, I had convinced myself that stormtroopers from Star Wars were hiding in the trees and waiting to shoot me in the back as soon as I turned to go back into the house. Needless to say, I often ran rather than walked the 20 feet back to the door of the house. Stormtroopers cannot be trusted. Story 29. In 1977, I was 5 years old. My mom and stepdad were more concerned about getting high in any way possible than being even at a basic level of responsibility. 2 instances come to mind. I woke up in pitch blackness and complete silence. I called out and received no response. I called again, but still no reply. I started to lose it and cried hysterically. It turned out the power had gone out, and they thought it would be a good idea to wander around the neighborhood while under the influence, leaving a 5-year-old boy alone in a rundown apartment. When they eventually returned, they got angry at me for ruining their fun and genuinely did not understand what the problem was. I wasn't technically alone in this situation, but I felt invisible, so I might as well have been. A friend of my mom decided to cook a large pot of spaghetti with mushrooms as the main ingredient. Everyone was completely oblivious to me for 3 full days. They wandered around, bumping into walls and talking to themselves. Luckily, I had learned to cook for myself at 5 years old, so I made all my own meals. But it was like The Walking Dead. They looked like my parents and neighbors but lacked any human attributes for 3 days. Interestingly enough, I heard my mom telling my son about that particular incident when we were eating pizza with mushrooms. I got extremely upset, but she is so mentally drained that she thought it was funny again. Do not use drugs, kids. Story 30. 2 times I thought I was alone. I was 11 and reading on the swings at my elementary school playground, which was across the field from my backyard. It was not school hours, so the park was empty. Or at least it was until 2 older junior high boys yanked my arm behind my back and forced me to pull my pants and underwear down. They did not do anything worse, but it was scary, violating, and mortifying anyway, even if it was not full-on sexual assault. I was in my first apartment without a roommate, which had partial walls made of shelves. I was in bed around 3 a.m. when my door opened, and I heard a man come in, and then nothing. Time passed and I was scared to make a sound. I could not see him from my angle. I did not know if he was there to rob me or sexually assault me or worse. After what seemed like forever of nothing happening, I got the nerve to call emergency services and whisper that there was an intruder. The police came and removed the passed-out drunk guy who had meant to go back into the party at an apartment a few doors down. Needless to say, I was a lot more careful about locking the door after that. Story 31. I was in a small abandoned house near where I live and found a person using drugs. I have never run so fast in my life. Story 32. I swear I heard the sound of my basement door clicking shut when I was home alone at about 10 years old. It was a very distinctive sound and was always loud because it echoed up the stairs. This happened about 15 minutes before my bus was scheduled to arrive, so I ran out the door. I got home after school, and nothing was stolen or broken. Story 33. Episodes of psychosis where I was no longer in touch with any reality, with a perception shift compared to my social environment. I could not understand anything about them. It felt like they lived in a different world, as if I was sleepwalking or had awakened in the midst of a scary, strange dream I could not control. And then there was amnesia, a frightening amnesia afterwards. It is similar to the moments before a seizure. You know you will lose consciousness and control over yourself in the next seconds or minutes, and you desperately try to escape, distract yourself, or focus just to avoid what is to come, still knowing that you will eventually face the same disaster you have already experienced before. Story 34. I was outside smoking a cigarette at night next to the garage of a house we were renting. Somewhere around the garage were a few thin metal poles, maybe 4 feet tall and half an inch in diameter. I am not sure what they were for. Maybe at one point they held up saplings or marked the perimeter of the garage. Anyway, it was dark, and I was high, and I did not realize I was standing right next to one of these poles. I bent down quickly to snub my cigarette out on the ground, and the pole I was standing next to pushed its way through my teeth and jabbed the back of my throat. That's right, I inadvertently put the pole in my mouth and gagged on it. I had a bloody hole in the back of my throat for a week, and I am lucky I did not get an infection. I always thought about what if I had been a few inches off and it went into my eye instead of my mouth. Story 35. I saw a truck pull out in front of me and proceed to be hit by a semi-truck. It was T-boned on the driver's side at highway speed. The driver did not survive. Story 36. I was 15 at the time, watching television alone in my house when suddenly 2 small shadows in the shape of children passed in front of me. They were playing, I think, but I was so scared that I couldn't scream or make a sound. Something interesting about this is that in my house there are 2 statues of children, so I don't know. Story 37. Broke down on the A87 highway in Australia, about 10 minutes north of a small community called Awancha, approximately 250 miles from Alice Springs. It took a mechanic 6 hours to reach my location in the nearly pitch-black Australian outback. I thought I was going to die, so probably that. Story 38. Almost choked on a cough drop, alone at night. I was sick and coughed. That drop got lodged, and I had a "is this how I go?" moment before it got unstuck and I vomited everywhere. Fun times. Story 39. Once years ago, I had some cocaine. I had heard it was fun to sprinkle it in a joint, so I did. I thought my heart was going to explode. I just wrote it out until the feeling subsided, not knowing if I was going to die. That was terrifying. I never did that again. Story 40. I heard someone making a sandwich in the middle of the night while staying at my grandparents' house, as they were in the hospital. The main problem was that I was the only one there. Story 41. The very first time my mom ever let me stay home alone, there was an earthquake that hit my area. We do not live in a place where earthquakes are more common, so I had never felt one before. It was not significant enough to cause any damage, but some books and other items fell off the shelves. This was before mobile phones were common, so I did not have any way to call my mom. When she came home from taking my brothers to the playground, I told her what happened, and she did not believe me. My dad felt it at work and confirmed to her that I was not crazy when he got home. Story 42. A woman tried to run me off the road during heavy traffic on the highway. One second I was on my way to school, the next I was trying to navigate through traffic to get away from a woman who was apparently trying to cause me to rear-end her by how hard she would brake check me. I got away thanks to a fortunate gap in the traffic flow, but by the time I lost her in my rearview mirror and reached my exit, I was shaking from fear and adrenaline. Story 43. I had no cell reception. I woke to the sound of someone breaking into my garage, and I knew exactly who would be coming for me. But it didn't make sense for him to be breaking into the garage, let alone so loudly, especially as he could hear my two raging dogs. So it might be a neighborhood kid, some person looking to steal something. I have a shotgun loaded with slugs. I pointed it at the door to the garage and waited. If it was a neighborhood kid or something, they could have whatever was in there. But if that door opened, whoever it was could leave through a wall. But then the noise stopped. Then an engine I knew started. I got to the window in time to see a truck I know drive away. Apparently, our incompetent handyman, who had been working on the house, had forgotten equipment. Instead of calling like someone reasonable, he decided to break in. When told how close he had come to dying, he laughed and said he would have shot through the door. He couldn't believe how lucky he had been. What can I say? God loves fools. Story 44. I left my mobile phone on the table, went to the bathroom, came back, and was somewhere else with a message sent to someone I do not know. Story 45. July 12, 2019. My dialysis port ruptured in my bathroom, and I nearly bled to death. I lost so much blood that my hemoglobin dropped from 12 to 5. Story 46. We were camping in Upper Peninsula near Calumet and Mohawk, right in town, basically. Oddly, the campground was completely deserted, and it looked like it had been set up in a hurry over the pandemic. You know, the old mining campground right there. The big building looked abandoned, and we started walking around it, realizing, I think someone is living here. Not a big deal. I've seen way worse. We paid it no mind and tried not to bother the residents. A couple of days of solitude went by, and we were lying there listening to the rain in the middle of the night when we heard a truck pull in. We hadn't even met any staff. We paid our fee online and just kind of pulled in, so we thought maybe it was the owner or something. Then the screaming started. Unhinged, intense wailing, punctuated by rants. The line that stuck out most was, "And that's why I'm having babies and you're not." It actually got a chuckle out of us. But then it just kept going on and on. At some point, we heard her get out and start pacing, and we knew from experience she was literally out of her mind and way too high on substances. We started getting scared. We didn't make any noise. We didn't even move. We just kept listening, especially when she got back in and drove her truck around the path. We were literally praying she didn't see our bright green tent tucked into the trees. She didn't. On the way home, we stopped in that big forest in the middle of Wisconsin to sleep in a United States Department of Agriculture campground outside of Ashland. Those woods are haunted, for anyone who doesn't know. We smoked a bowl with some concentrated cannabis on top, and got so high we were scared that Bigfoot was going to pop out of the bushes any second. That one was funny. Story 47. dreamed about the future, and then watched it play out in real life once I was around the people I know again. It is crazy the growth you make when you are alone. Story 48. I'd say sleep paralysis as well. It happens as soon as I fall asleep on my back. It's not scary anymore, though. It's just exhausting. Story 49. The moment of realization that my mind wanted to harm me. Until that point, you and those suicidal thoughts are along for the ride together. The toughest fight you can have is with yourself, and the moment that you realize you need to confront it is harrowing in a unique way. Story 50. Doing a major job in Detroit after it ended. A small hotel on the wrong side of town. I went to sleep with my pistol in my nightstand. When I woke up, the nightstand drawer was open and my gun was gone. I called the manager and the police to no avail. A few minutes later, I noticed my hands were shaking badly. In my 20s, that didn't happen. The thought of someone standing over me while I was asleep scared me greatly. If I had woken up, I would not be here. Story 51. I was driving in a heavy rainstorm at night on the highway, and there was a long bank curve with stagnant, invisible water. I was in the fast lane where the water level was the highest, and my car power slid. My car was pretty low, and it felt like I hit a wall suddenly and lost control, sliding through 6 lanes. I almost hit a truck in the slowest lane. Story 52. One time when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I was walking home alone and it was dark. A random man, who I would estimate was in his 30s, walked next to me and started chatting. When I told him I didn't want to talk, he said, "Why? It's not like I'm going to harm you and hide your body in a rug." I think only someone who would consider doing that would say something like that. Fortunately, we were right outside my house at that time. Story 53. Mine isn't that bad compared to some of these. But last year I was in my college dorm room eating a snack when I suddenly started choking. Thanks to my multiple first aid trainings, as I work at a daycare and need to be certified, I was able to perform the Heimlich maneuver on myself. Came out and I started coughing like crazy, and my throat hurt for a day afterward. The scariest part was definitely the trapped feeling I had, which is not the best way of describing it, but I don't really have the words for it. When it was stuck in my throat and my first attempts weren't working, I felt like I was alone and could barely breathe. There was nothing I could do. I felt lightheaded, and it was so scary. Story 54. When I was about 8 years old, I was alone at home. I heard something knock on my parents' window, which was quite strange because we lived in an apartment on the 2nd floor. I was too scared to go look, so I told myself that it was just a pigeon hitting the window with its beak. After a while, it stopped, and I believe I will never know if it was, in fact, a pigeon. It was not the scariest thing that has happened to me, but it was the only one that occurred while I was alone. Story 55. Had just bought the house I currently live in. Nothing in the house except for 2 lawn chairs and a television at the time of this incident. My wife went to get us some fast food. I went to use the bathroom in the master bedroom. The house has hardwood floors. Footsteps are very distinct and recognizable. So my wife left. I am sitting on the throne. The door wasn't completely closed as there was an issue with the alignment of the latch, but it was up to the frame and trim. Maybe 5 to 10 minutes passed. Suddenly, I heard footsteps start at the end of the hall. The steps clomp all the way down the hall, turn, and come into the master bedroom, stopping at the bathroom door in front of me. The door opens about 1 foot to 1.5 feet. I am sitting directly behind that door, and then nothing. No sounds. No nothing. I stand up, pull my pants up, and step into the bedroom. Nothing. I look down the hall. Nothing. I scour the house for anything. Nothing. All doors and windows were shut and locked. I called my wife and asked her if she had come back to the house and left again. She told me no and that she was about to head back home from where she went. This happened 8 years ago. I remember it like it happened an hour ago. Story 56. I was racing around a back road I knew well on my motorcycle with a random car I encountered that wanted to have some fun. I was going way too fast and came around a corner very quickly to find a large sport utility vehicle taking a left out of their driveway right in front of me. I had to quickly correct my course into the opposite lane and barely squeezed around it without going off onto the shoulder. Could have gone much worse, especially if another car had happened to be coming the other way. Story 57. My wife had a mental health crisis while I was out of town. I was sitting in a hotel room trying to figure out if I should cut my trip short and go home right away. I was also mentally preparing for whether or not she would be alive when I got there. I didn't cut the trip short because I was one day away from coming back anyway. It took about a year for her to mostly recover, though she will likely never fully recover. Story 58. When I was little, I remember everyone was out, so I was alone at home. The remote control for the TV was dead, and I couldn't turn it off. Suddenly, the channel played a horror movie, which I somehow watched. Because of that, I took baths with the door open for a few weeks because I was afraid that the ghost would appear. Story 59. I was about 12 or 13 years old, home alone, and fully aware that I was home alone. No one came home because I was in the living room, and the door was facing me, so I would see if someone came in. I was home alone when I heard cabinets slamming. I thought my mom had come in to prepare dinner. When I went around the wall to look and talk to her, no one was there. After that, whenever I hear any noise while I am alone, I either go to sleep, turn on music, or leave the house. It is absolutely terrifying. Story 60. First time in Washington, D.C. I am sleeping alone in my hotel room when suddenly, a strobe light starts going off with a blaring alarm and an automated voice louder than anything I have ever heard before instructing everyone to evacuate immediately. It turns out, the elevator on the other side of the hotel had caught fire, and someone pulled the most terrifying fire alarm on earth. Story 61. A childhood friend wanted me to stop by and feed their dog a couple of times a day while they were on vacation. They told me where the food was and gave me instructions. I was about 10 years old. My mom was outside in the car waiting while I ran in to feed the dog. I went inside, said hello to the dog, and dumped her food in the bowl. I turned around to fill up her water bowl when suddenly the basement door opened and a random man appeared. He scared me. He was scruffy looking and was wearing a flannel shirt. He told me that he had been told to watch the dog while they were gone. I had never seen this man before in my life, as I was always hanging out at my friend's house, and he was giving me the creepiest vibes. I said, "Oh, okay," and left. I didn't come back to feed the dog again after that and didn't say a word to my friend about it either. I'm sure he was just as startled as I was, but he definitely gave me the creeps. Story 62. Haunted house as a kid. Every door flung open at once, as did all the windows. Old military housing that survived World War II in Southeast Asia. Story 63. Lights turned off and I heard a loud shattering glass noise. Turns out my dog just knocked over a shot glass. Story 64. While I'm sleeping at home alone, someone stole my laptop right behind me, and I didn't wake up at all. Story 65. I started choking once when I was alone and there was no one to help me. It was not fun. Cleared up on its own. There was not anything caught in my throat. I drank some soda, and it went down the wrong way. Story 66. I got followed in the woods in Tennessee. I couldn't see what it was, but it was big and made the tall undergrowth wildly wave from side to side as it moved. I was so frightened, as I was alone. It was evening and my knees started knocking together. I got out of there quickly. I didn't go walking in the woods alone again. Story 67. I was riding in an express elevator at a high-rise hotel by myself. The service floors 16 to 30. It bumped and stopped moving at floor 16. I hit the emergency call button, and nothing happened. I hit the alarm bell button. Nothing happened. Panic started to set in as I was screaming for help and banging on the door. About 20 minutes in, I pried the elevator door open, and it eventually let me open it. It somehow exactly stopped on floor 16, the last one this elevator serviced. The hotel only offered me fancy Voss water and snacks for my troubles. Marriott lost me as a customer forever. Story 68. I was in a Walmart bathroom when I was about 14. I had just finished and went to wash my hands. When I went to the sink, a lady was already there washing her hands as well. It was just the two of us. When I was almost done, the lady looked at me and said something. She had a very bad speech impediment, so I didn't really understand what she was saying. It was something along the lines of me being a redhead. I'm used to people commenting on it, so I kind of just smiled and said thank you, but she kept repeating it. Eventually, I could make out that she said, "I've never seen someone your age with that hair color before." I thought that was a bit strange, so I just awkwardly smiled and tried to leave. She was getting closer, and I was feeling uncomfortable, so I wanted to exit as soon as possible. But then she stopped me. She touched my hair. It was very creepy. She stood in front of the door, blocking me from going out. At this point, I was really nervous because I didn't know what she was doing or if she meant to harm me, so I tried to push past her. Eventually, she moved to the side. As I was leaving, she just stared at me, her head turning as I walked away. I hurried out of there. I still don't really know if she meant to frighten me since I think she had a condition, so I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But I was a minor and I just didn't feel safe at all. It isn't that unusual, but it's what I thought of immediately. Story 69. I was home alone while my mom was running errands when a massive thunderstorm hit. Heavy rain, loud thunder, and crazy winds didn't take long for the nearby tornado sirens to go off and cause me to go into the worst panic attack I have ever had. Situations like this scare me to death. I grabbed my phone and our cats, darted to the cupboard under the stairs, and put my mom on speakerphone to calm me down. All the while she was driving down the highway as fast as she could to get back home. It was scary as hell. Thankfully, no tornado ended up forming, and the storm began to calm down not long after my mom got home, but we did get some hail. Story 70. My boyfriend and roommate were both not home. It was very rare for me to be alone in our apartment. I didn't really want to venture outside alone at night due to living uptown and having past experiences where I had been messed with or approached when I went out on my own, but I decided I wanted to make myself a little drink to settle for the night, and I needed a mixer. I grabbed some change and decided to walk to the soda machine across the complex. On my way back to my apartment, a man started following me and making noises. I lived on the road outside of the complex, on the second floor. When I got to the end of my staircase, he started running at me and growling. He chased me halfway up the stairs. Thankfully, I was able to quickly unlock the door and get inside, but it was terrifying. I have no idea what his plan was or why he was growling. I called the police, but he was gone by the time they got there. This was the second time I was chased outside of my apartment, but the first time I was chased up my stairs. It was terrifying for me because it was the first night I was alone in a while. What if he actually caught me? What if he got inside our apartment? I had nightmares constantly after that about a man trying to get into our apartment. I felt extremely violated on my own turf, and it affected me mentally for a good few months. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.